Everyone, when they are young, knows what their destiny is. At that point in their lives, everything is clear and everything is possible. They are not afraid to dream and to yearn for everything they would like to see happen to them in their lives. But as time passes, a mysterious force begins to convince them that it will be impossible for them to realize their destiny. Whoever you are, or whatever it is that you do, when you really want something, it's because that desire originated in the soul of the universe. It's your mission on earth. To realize one's destiny is a person's only real obligation. All things are one. And when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. These are the readings from my favorite book, Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. As the old adage says, fortune favors the bold. This is my entrepreneurship journey, a show about entrepreneurs, innovators, and thought leaders. I'm Vuyelwa and welcome. Vuyelwa Nyakaza is an economic development strategist, a seasoned branding expert, and a public speaker who is passionate about transformative economic development in Africa. She is the founder and managing director of Sukume Trading and Investments, which is involved in consulting, trade, and investment. Vuyelwa positions African economies, businesses, and brands for global competitiveness and socio-economic transformation. Prior to founding Sukume, Vuyelwa was the global brand strategist for the MTN Group, working across 22 countries in Africa and the Middle East. She was also a marketing manager at Brand South Africa, leading to the development of South Africa's global brand strategy in the build-up to the 2010 FIFA World Cup. She worked closely with the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition to position South African economy and promote South African exports. Vuyelwa built robust classical marketing experience, managing Unilever brands in local, which is South Africa, regional, which is Africa, Middle East and Turkey, as well as international, which is Brazil, roles. Vuyelwa, thank you for coming to Merge. Thank you for being here and welcome.
Thank you. It's a very nice opportunity that you have given me. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Oh, you are welcome, Vuyelwa. You are here with us, so we are going to talk about your company, Sukume. Just before then, I just want to start before you went on to start your business. You worked for multinational companies, organizations such as the MTN Group. You worked for Brand SA and others. But then, can you please take us through a time when you transitioned, when you decided, okay, now I am going to start my own company? How was that process like?
All right. Well, I actually spent about 12 years, maybe 12 and a half years in corporate
Okay.
before I decided to jump ship, as we call it, and leave. So, as you said, I did work for big multinational companies, not many, but some of the biggest ones. And so I think I had an idea that at some point in my journey, I will have my own company. I didn't know exactly when, and I wasn't exactly sure as to what I would want to do, but it was somewhere there in the plans at the back of my mind. And so that's the journey that I've traveled. I think in my mind, I've always known that I'm going to leave corporate. And I think the other thing is the experience of corporate for me, the more I climbed what is typically called the corporate ladder, the more I realized that the older or the more experienced you have, the more it's no longer just about how technically competent you are that will decide whether you go up further, or you are the first one to be promoted. It's very political. And so it involves a lot of non-technical work things. And I'm not saying there's anything particularly wrong with that, but I think just being in corporate, having learned everything that I've learned, I realized that I don't think I'm a corporate person.
Mm. Okay.
So it was just, yeah, I told myself that some of the things that, at least in my experience, and of course, I'm not saying this is everybody's experience,
Yeah.
like some of the things that I realized one needs to do, the attitude that one needs to have, sometimes even the values, the way you need to change. Sometimes, for me, it would have meant me changing myself too much for me to be comfortable. So I decided that that's where it will end for me. And I told myself that if I ever am to run a corporation, it will be mine. And I will try and obviously do whatever I can to make sure that it is as conducive to younger people with maybe a different sort of set of values and the things that they want out
Uh-huh.
of life. So
Uh-huh.
I've had a good run. I won't lie. I have been very blessed.
Yeah.
I've worked for some of the best companies and I've traveled the world.
Yes.
I have been privileged to work on not just some of the very best companies, but on some of the best projects, that have increased my capacity technically,
Yes.
my networks and footprint. So I will not even pretend to lie and say that corporate has not been good for me. Corporate was very good for me.
Yes.
But I think, as I said, I had always had a dream to start my own business. And when the time was right, I decided to come out.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow. So now this was in 2013 when you
that's
now
correct.
had decided, and Sukume. Why the name Sukume? What made you decide to call your company
That's nice.
Sukume?
That's nice. It's not very often that I get asked that question, so it's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
Sukume is a Xhosa name. I'm Xhosa. And my tribe is Xhosa.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I wanted the name Pagama, which means
Pagam.
stand up or arise.
Yeah.
But when I was registering at SARS, it's not SARS, was it CIPC? They
CIPC.
told me that that name is overused and there's too many companies with that name. So I
Uh-huh.
then decided to go for something that means exactly the same thing, but maybe not as common.
Yeah.
And that's how I arrived at Sukume.
Sukume.
So that's basically, and Suguma means arise. It means get up and keep standing. If you are standing, keep standing. If you're rising, keep rising. So it's in the affirmative, but continuous tense.
Yes.
And the purpose behind it was to say, obviously, I started the company as Sukume Consulting,
Yes.
and our objective was always to assist companies to arise, to
Mm.
wheresoever they are, that we may take them from where they are to where they need to be, or at least be part of the journey that progresses them in an upward arising trajectory.
Yes.
That is what the name is. It's a name about what the company purposes to do
Right.
for our clients. Yeah.
I see. But now, back now, thank you for that for that explanation about the name, how it came about. I think I like Sukume better than Pakama. I think there's
Me too. Actually, I do. I feel I also it grew on me. I won't
yeah,
lie, it grew on me. It
yeah,
is a little bit more unique. It's a little bit deeper,
right,
and it's not as common as Pagama. So
yeah,
I'm quite happy actually that I
yeah,
didn't get.
Pakama.
Yeah,
Okay.
Pagama.
So now back in 2013, now when you started, now you no longer have the comfort of the corporate resources you had been enjoying in order for you to do your work. How was that process like? now starting? I don't know if you are on your own or you are in partnership, but please, can you take us through that those first few months when you started?
Actually, my first, I think, few months were like wonderful. You know, when I was making the decision to leave and I was telling people that I'm going to start a business,
Yeah,
I tried to interview existing entrepreneurs that I knew, people that were already out there doing business,
right.
and just so that I can be sober. Like I didn't want to, just get into it naively. So
Uh,
I knew that the best thing for me to do is to prepare myself, is to at least do a little bit of dipstick research so
right.
that I can understand the realities of what it means. Because I think when you are working in a corporation, people that are entrepreneurs sometimes appear very glamorous and very
Mm,
well achieved. But they also honestly talk about some of the challenges they have. So I wanted to know the full story.
mm-hmm,
And so I did a little bit of research, and then a lot of the people that I spoke to, didn't speak to many people, but people that I knew and trusted,
mm,
said to me that entrepreneurship is very difficult. It has its moments. There are certain things that they enjoy about it. For example, the freedom to work on what you actually want to work on, the freedom of your time because you choose when to work and what to work on, and things like that that may seem small to someone, but when you are actually, you know, have your time back, and you get the opportunity to work on things that matter to you, it's a huge privilege that only when you are doing it can you truly understand what it means.
uh-huh,
So those were some of the things that I was told. I was also told that the journey is probably harder than what anybody will be able to explain, and even the people were saying that you will have to start being there for you to understand just how hard it can be.
mm,
So my first few months, I was sort of like, I came out of it a little bit sober,
mm-hmm,
with these sort of like, opposing sort of ends of the spectrum in terms of what it means.
right.
But I think because I had planned to leave, so I was financially okay. I had enough savings, like to take me through at least 6 months to a year. I'm
Right.
I'm very thrifty
Yeah.
as a person, so I did have a saving culture, so I wasn't particularly concerned financially.
Okay.
And so I was, yeah. And then I think because I had planned to leave, I understood what that I needed to obviously save. There, something else that I did before was actually to start playing into in the entrepreneurial space part time. So
Ah,
there was a lady that I started working with, or when I was, still in corporate, just trying to figure out that when I leave, what would we do? What would be the kinds of work that we would want to do? She was already working full time in entrepreneurship, and she wanted to partner with me.
right.
And so I had already, I think, dabbled. It was mostly for me as a side hustle.
Mm,
So I would assist her, for example, with some of the things that I had strengths in. It was a consulting business, very similar to Sukume
okay.
to begin with. And so it was something I could do in my spare time. And it wasn't very heavy on my time, to be honest, because I would do it in the evenings if I can spare the time, because my work was pretty hectic,
Yeah.
and in weekends, etc. So I had been a little bit of I had put my foot in entrepreneurship for at least 18 months before I jumped.
Okay.
So I didn't feel like I was a complete novice. And
Mm,
I think having an experience like that enabled me to transition a little bit smoother. I knew from her, because we had already worked on the business plan. She would be approaching clients, etc., preparing for when it was possible for me to move.
ah,
So I feel like I was not a total novice. So I was a little bit of, I think someone called it, a hybrid. Like you
hybrid.
you you are
Yeah.
working full time,
Yeah.
but you are also doing side hustles that you are preparing yourself for to leave.
To leave.
The other thing that
Yeah.
also I think it prepared me a little bit better for entrepreneurship was, I used to loan money to small and medium enterprises.
Ah,
And because I saw it as a gap, because a friend of mine origin asked me for like a 10,000 loan.
right.
He had started a business. So because I believed in him and the idea, I decided to loan him the money. And then it wasn't like a huge amount for me.
Yeah.
So I just decided to give it to him to say, okay, start the business. And when you are ready to pay me back, you can pay me back. We didn't have terms and conditions in terms of like when I would get the money. It was
Repayment.
really just me investing in a dream of someone and that I believed in.
Mm.
But after about I don't know 4 months or so, he said, "I'm ready to pay you back." And then yeah, he paid me back. Maybe it was a little bit longer, maybe 6 months.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks later, he said, "Actually, can I borrow that money again? Because I've got cash flow problems."
Ah,
And so that then began the idea. And he asked me if I can put interest in it so that he doesn't feel bad about borrowing money from me without me getting anything out of it.
yeah.
And that's how Sukume Capital actually was born.
Right.
And I began to lend money to more and more entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
and through his network as well. It was very easy for me. I drafted out like a process where it took me very little time to do. I
Yes.
had like a lawyer and I had contracts and stuff. So I had already been dabbling in entrepreneurship, both in
Ah,
terms of the consulting side and a little bit on the SME
yes.
like capital loans.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was really that's so I don't think I can say that I was a complete novice
Yeah.
because I was dabbling.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, I think it was easier for me honestly because of those experiences.
Yeah.
I yeah, it was not difficult at all.
Y-
I think yeah, the other thing is because I was okay like in terms of my savings,
Yes.
I wasn't cash strapped. I kept waiting for I'm putting it in inverted commas,
Yeah.
the poverty to strike me.
Yeah.
And because I was also mentally sort of prepared for that, if
Y-
anybody can say that.
Yes.
And so and I realized that actually I'm okay. And I don't know what these people were talking about because I'm actually
You're,
okay.
you're doing, yeah.
I'm able to pay my bills. My lifestyle has it's changed somewhat because obviously I didn't want to be like I had to drop sort of my living standards a little bit
Of
to
course.
accommodate and until I felt like financially I was back where at least where I was when I was in corporate. So it was a bit of an adjustment, but I don't think it was as huge as maybe someone who's just jumping out completely
Mm.
without the experience, without the savings,
Yeah.
and without even the information that the research in terms of what it takes.
Of course. So then when you started, you now had to like what, rent office space, or did you start working from home? How was it like? Or you just started and went full force, had office space? This is where we work. You're an
Actually,
employee. Yeah.
yeah, actually, the lady that I was partnering with, because our agreement was that I will wait to leave corporate once we have got a contract that is able to support both of us. Because for me, if I would not have been able to start a business without like a contract that is going to support me,
Right.
and so that was our agreement. And so when that time came, I was able to join her in a business that was kind of look, we had our first big client and our first big contract, so I could actually leave. So that was again for me
Ah,
maybe a soft landing pad.
yes. Yes.
So that was number one. But also because we are strategists and consultants and we are dealing with brands, and for me, for example, I was working on economic I was working on nation brands specifically,
Yes.
which have a very strong economic imperative.
Mm.
Then we decided that we need to find an office, an address that was going to be sort of like conducive to us being able to attract the kind of clients that we wanted. So
Ah.
our first office actually was in Hyde Park for all places.
Okay. Go big.
So we went big, I
Yeah.
suppose, but in a small way. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
we had a tiny little office,
Yeah.
very, very small office, but in a very sort of like highly regarded area in terms
Yes.
of, consultants. And I think we were basically trying to impress our potential and present and potential clients.
Right.
So that's how we started out in an office. And yeah, but that was my first foray into entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. So Sukume, it's Sukume Trade, Investment, and Consulting. Did you start that way, or did you, increase your portfolio as you went on? Or was it always Sukume Trade, Investment, and Consulting business?
Actually, that's a very good question
Mm-hmm.
because it's almost like a prophetic name. Because when I registered the company,
Mm-hmm.
I was working full time, as I said in corporate. It was
Yes.
2011
Yes.
when I registered the company, and I registered as Sukume Trading and Investments. And the reason
Ah.
why I registered as Sukume Trading and Investment is because when I was seeking counsel from those that would know,
Mm-hmm.
I was saying I want a company, like a holding company, that is going to enable me to do different things without me having to change the name or register multiple companies.
Right.
So then the advice that I was given was, because I was like, do I call it Sugume Holdings, Sugume Investments, or
Mm-hmm.
what? And then I think the person that was advising me said that call it trading and investments because that allows you a broad spectrum of things that you can do, because trade can mean anything. It can mean you can be trading in selling, t-shirts. You can be trading
Right.
in the
Right.
stock market. That's how broad the spectrum is.
Yes.
And then obviously investments are by nature wide ranging as well. So it was really around that. But it's a very interesting, as I said, it feels like a prophetic name for me
Mm-hmm.
because my first paying client
Mm-hmm.
actually was a nation brand. Um,
Ah. Okay.
and so and obviously because I had worked at Brand South Africa, I understood the space of branding countries. And by from that experience, I had to learn how to market and position an economy
Yeah.
and understand the economics of things, because I'm not an economist. I have a marketing and a branding background,
Yes.
but to market a country, I had to learn about economics.
Right.
And so I understood it. And the real crux of nation branding is really about promoting and facilitating trade and investment. That's it,
Okay.
and maybe tourism to quite a large degree.
Yes.
But I think for me, because I had, when I was at Brand South Africa, I was attached to the Department of Trade and Industry.
Yes.
Um, I had that trade and industry experience. So, but when I was registering the company, that was not foremost in my mind. I just registered a company so that I can do anything with it.
Yeah.
But I actually ended up working in trade and investment by default because of the nature of the working on branding and positioning countries.
Yeah.
And so that's why I was saying it's very interesting that you asked me that, because I wouldn't have said the name was. I was not specifically thinking about it in the way that it actually turned out to be. And right now, actually, we are very much sort of like, I think our company has very much slowly evolved from being purely about around marketing and branding strategy to mostly like economic development strategy. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what we do. And because I think we've also come to recognize that, you know, branding countries is very different from branding, what is called consumer brands.
Right.
And so the dynamics are so different that you need to delve into actual economic development for you to be able to then have a brand that will deliver on its promises. So this is something that we've realized as practitioners in the nation branding space,
Right.
but also our colleagues and our competitors who are either practitioners or academics in the space. We've all realized that this industry was actually started out assuming that a lot of the that marketing principles from classic marketing in terms of fast moving consumer goods is going to assist even here. But we learned very quickly that it's very limiting. There's aspects of classical marketing that work
Yeah.
in branding countries, but a huge part of it has got very little to do with actual branding. But it's really about how do we build the actual countries to be competitive enough that their brands then become or build reputations out of what the countries actually do
Uh-huh.
versus what they say about themselves. So the nature of being in the space forces you to actually have to deal with real economic development issues.
Yes.
Fortunately, I have a strategy background, so it was not a huge jump for me personally, but that is the space that we are working in. That's how we then, and for example, right now our company focuses on three areas. It's obviously nation branding,
Right.
and as I said, nation branding is done with an economic imperative. It's about socio-economic transformation.
Yes.
That's why countries brand themselves. It's about attracting foreign direct investment,
Yes.
trade, tourism,
Tourism.
global events,
Uh-huh.
and even talent into the country. So it's multifaceted, but it's got an economic imperative. And then that's our first area,
Right.
nation branding. Secondly,
Yes.
we work on SME development.
Mm-hmm.
And SME development is something that we came into sort of like, I don't know, I don't want to call it by accident,
Mm-hmm.
but it was by also just the frustration of, I think there was a time where I felt like I'm developing all the brands of countries like Lesotho, South Africa,
Yes.
Botswana, etc., especially like SADC nations.
Right.
And we are getting paid in foreign currencies most of the time, depending on who's funding the project.
Right.
It's very nice,
Yeah.
but it felt like I was a little bit frustrated because it felt like I'm not seeing how the strategies that as Sukume we are developing are coming to life in terms of implementation, and that frustrated me because I'm purpose driven. I like to see the impact of the work that I'm doing, and I understood that where I'm currently working, it's a macroeconomic space.
Right.
I advise governments. And I advise, for example, economic development agencies in terms of how they visit their countries, as I said. And so it's very much at a macroeconomic level with national governments, etc. But the more I read up, the more I understood that everybody was talking about entrepreneurs and SMEs being the drivers of the economy. And it's
Yes.
not a space that I actually understood. So it was something I've always been interested in. And again, as I said, that there was an opportunity for me to actually, when I was newly working in my business, to actually build or to assist on working with entities. For example, I worked on the African Regional Chamber of Commerce,
Yeah.
which was an organization and is still an organization whose job is to build or assist African entrepreneurs to do business with Israel and the global market, etc.
Ah.
And then other clients came that had a similar, you know how it is when you've done work in a particular industry, then other people recognize your experience and they
Yes.
want you to assist them with that.
Ye-
And that's how we basically entered the what we call SME development or entrepreneurship development space, and it became a pillar of our business,
Ah.
outside of just doing purely nation branding. And that was a beautiful, retrospectively, a beautiful balance, because on the one hand, in nation branding, you are working at a macroeconomic level,
Right.
and then in terms of the space of entrepreneurship development, you're actually seeing, entrepreneurship and economic development bottom up,
Right.
where
Right.
the actual, that where it is lived, the actual people who are building companies that are responsible, for example, in South Africa, for 30% contribution to GDP.
Yes.
So it was a very different experience, and I felt like it finally, when I started to do that work and get more and more involved, I was starting to sleep better at night,
Mm.
because it's much easier to see the impact that you've made on a business of an entrepreneur
Right.
versus an entire economy. I think obviously there are linkages between an economy and its entrepreneurs, but it was very fulfilling for me to do, the bottom up. I still do both.
Yeah.
So that's how we got to that space, and I think it's something we're still passionate about.
Mhm.
The third and last pillar that we do specifically on Sukume Consulting
Yeah.
is intra-Africa trade. And
Intra-African.
so again,
Yeah.
intra-Africa trade.
Yeah.
So we recognized that, Africans do less business with each other.
Yeah.
Most of the money that comes into Africa, leaves the continent, because we're buying from outside
Yeah.
and not ourselves.
Yeah.
And it became a gradual passion of mine, because I began to understand that wealth is created when money circulates in an economy.
Right.
And I think I always like to give the example of Jews.
Mm.
Jews are said to be, or are known to be, some of the wealthiest people in the world. It doesn't matter that the most countries, they're actually a tiny minority.
Mm.
Most Jews community, or Jewish communities, are usually, at the top of the economic scale
Yes.
in any country.
Yes.
And part of what creates, and I'm not saying it's the only ingredient, but part of what makes Jews wealthy is because they buy from each other.
Mm.
A
Mm.
Jew
Mm.
will send their child to a Jewish school. If they need an optometrist, they'll buy from a Jewish optometrist.
Right.
If they need a car, they'll buy from a Jewish dealership. And so their money circulates, I don't know how many times before it leaves the Jewish community. So that's what they do at a small scale. And the same thing is done by the so-called like developed world.
Right.
If you look at, for example, Europe.
Mm.
Europe, I think, trades with each other. I mean, they
Mm.
have the European Union, which is
Yes.
an economic bloc,
Yes.
just to ease trade amongst the nations. And they are at around 60 to 70%, intra-European trade.
Mm-hmm.
And their money, it means that effectively their money is circulating where? In Europe.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing that in America, or in the Americas, Americans also trade with each other at around 59% the last time I checked.
Yeah.
And so that means American money, 59% of the time, stays in America, from what I understand. And so in Africa, the statistics are much lower. And I think the last statistics that we checked,
Mm-hmm.
we sit at between 12 to 18% intra-Africa trade.
But it,
And so
but it,
sorry.
sorry, but is it improving, Vuyelwa? This 12 to 18%, was it lesser than that before? Do you see any? Are we hitting the call? Is there any progress, minute as it can be?
There is great improvements that
Okay.
we have seen
Okay.
from the policy framework side.
Aha.
So the African Union, which is the supposedly the preeminent organization for African development, they started an initiative to boost intra-Africa trade, also understanding the dynamics of what I've just explained, and how
Yes.
it has the capacity to improve wealth creation in African countries. So this was started, I think, a few years ago. I'm not exactly sure which year,
Yes.
but that initiative culminated into a pan-African policy, economic policy, that's called AFCFTA. It stands for African Free Continental Trade Area, which
Aha.
means that African countries are now legally able to trade with each other, where between 90 to 95, and in some instances 98% of goods and services will be traded of um, free of customs. Because
Yes.
one of the biggest hindrances of intra-Africa trade is been the
The
tariffs,
tariffs.
or the
Yes.
customs that you pay. If you are bringing something from another country, you pay, and
Yes.
that then makes it difficult, because it increases the price, because all traders do it. They just add whatever they've paid to the final price, and it's so goods, then the goods are not as competitive as they can be. So just changing the tariff structure already enables much more trade to take place in the continent. So I think that from a policy perspective,
Mm.
the African Union has done much for us in terms of creating an enabling environment for intra-Africa trade.
Hmm.
So that's one thing. The other one is I think is to recognize that even if you do have a policy
Yeah.
that says you can trade virtually for free, there are the so-called non-tariff barriers.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, the fact that Africa is logistically challenged, there's the road infrastructure,
Mm.
much of infrastructure is still in developing phase
Yeah.
in many African countries, that still puts a damper on it. So you can change it from a legal perspective, but until you actually build physical
Come.
and even organizational infrastructure to be
Mm,
able to allow that trade to take place, we are limited. So I'm saying, yes, there's good news because
mm.
the legal framework is there. But I do think that it's up to now the actual entrepreneurs to seize the opportunity in terms of seeing how they bring that into reality.
Uh-huh. Okay, that is important work that Sukume is doing. Now, going back to your other pillar of Sukume, which is SME development. Can we talk a little bit about that, Vuyelwa? Any SME I can approach Sukume? Is it for to develop in what sense? Business optimization or any SME, regardless of the size of the company, can approach Sukume if they find that they are struggling, they need to develop in a certain sector?
Good question.
Mm.
So the model that we have adopted is because we are obviously consultants and we are not cheap.
Yeah,
And remember, we started our business consulting to nations and governments and stuff like that.
right.
So SMEs don't have the kinds of budgets to afford the type of services that we provide. So our model has traditionally been to work with entities that are responsible for developing the entrepreneurs.
Aha.
So we would then be either funded or our ultimate impact would be that would be the client is the actual entity, whether it is an incubator, accelerator,
Aha.
or an organization like your CEDA, for example,
Yes.
that is responsible for actual economic development. We would assist those entities, what we call economic development agencies, to
Aha.
developing strategies for them, developing projects for them, working with them to create a better environment for the growth of entrepreneurs. And so that's the one aspect of it that enables us to impact that space. And because, to be very honest, very few entrepreneurs will afford the kind of services
Mm-hmm.
that we provide.
Mm-hmm.
The second way that we do this is, for example, we work with a momentum. A momentum has a passion for developing women entrepreneurs
Mm-hmm.
in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So they then fund the actual SMEs for us to do what is called business coaching, or sometimes it's called business development services, which is
I,
basically capacitating
I
small
see.
and medium enterprises that are owned by women founders to
Uh-huh.
assist them to grow. Because again, if those guys were if we were to charge them the type of consulting fees, they
Yes,
wouldn't afford them.
I see.
So that's where then we do the work, but the funder is a sponsor who has a passion, or who has like an inclination
Mm.
towards, or a mandate to develop entrepreneurs. So that's how we have traditionally been working in the space. Obviously, it's you start somewhere in an industry and then you kind of like grow. So for example, part of our responsibilities or projects under SME development is to create market access platforms,
Mm.
that enable entrepreneurs to gain access to a broader community of potential target audiences. Because as we have been learning, this is one of the areas that we've seen that entrepreneurs, you can have a beautiful product, you can have a wonderful functioning project that delivers,
Mm.
but if you don't have a platform to sell,
Mm.
and if your brand, for example, is not known, and most of brands of entrepreneurs struggle to be known,
Mm.
it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to scale up your business.
Right.
So these are some of the things that we tackle by, from the understanding the gaps in the SME development space. We then create platforms. For example, we've got a new platform that we will probably be launching sometime early in 2023,
Mm.
which is called African Brands House. So
Okay.
this is an e-commerce platform
Mm-hmm.
that is going to host the businesses of small and medium enterprises so that they can sell it's
Ah,
almost like conceptually, it's almost like a mall.
yes.
But instead of each of these entrepreneurs having their own individual websites sitting all over the internet, not really correlated, we have decided to to curate some of these up and coming entrepreneurs in their areas where they are very good at the work that they are doing. Their brands are good, the quality of the product is good, the entrepreneurs themselves are doing a great job, and they have inspiring stories that truly have the capacity to impact a broader set of communities and target markets. But they are limited in terms of where they are able to sell, and they are limited also in terms of their brands being known. So the platform is we've created is to address that. And so we don't just give them a platform to sell, but the plan is to also market the businesses of the entrepreneurs in that platform, so that they can get the same sort of traction that brands that are coming out of that are funded and owned by big corporations have. And so those are the types of initiatives that we are putting out there to assist small and medium enterprise. So I
That's
think
brilliant.
with that type of initiative,
Yeah.
then an entrepreneur can come directly to us,
Yeah.
to say, you know what, I feel like I could benefit from a bigger market, and I could benefit from greater awareness of my brand.
Huh.
So those are, I mean, it's just one of the things that we do
Yeah.
that, without me getting into too many projects that we are
Yes,
working on.
yeah, that is brilliant. So I could just go on African Brand House, and depending on what type of a service I'm looking for, choose or select any one of the entrepreneurs that are dealing in that service that I would be looking for, but housed under the African Brand House. So I don't have to look around in the internet, looking for a service and
It's like
review.
it's, as I said, it's like a mall.
Ah,
When you go to a mall, there's many shops, and you
it's
can
it's
shop from this one and that one,
yeah.
instead of you trying to find. And also, these guys, the idea is to curate them. So these are the
Yeah.
people. Our model has to do with just also recognizing that Africa has traditionally been selling raw materials. We
Mm,
have a lot of resources in
mm,
the country, and we in the countries of Africa, and we usually just dig them up from the ground, or we pick them up from our farms, and then
mm,
we just ship them out raw as they are.
mm.
So and that means that the people that are buying raw materials from us get them for a very cheap price, because there's nothing
Yes.
added to them.
Yes.
Then they go and add value to our products, to the products that are coming out of Africa.
Mm.
They create, for example, leather that's coming out of Ethiopia.
Yeah.
The Italians buy it. They create beautiful bags and they shoes and all kinds of leather goods. And then it's written they're made in Italy. And they create brands that they then sell back to Africans at a very, very high
Yeah.
price. So the bulk of the value then goes to them, but the raw materials, come out of the continent. So we are addressing that by encouraging the entrepreneurs that are in local African markets, to say, on our platform, we want people whose the materials that they use to kind of like develop their products actually come, bulk of them, either from the local country or they are sourced from Africa. It's about also this intra-Africa trade that we are promoting, but it's also about saying we need to beneficiate, we need to add value to the raw materials, and we are supporting those entrepreneurs who have a heart for, just growing. And it's also about industrialization. Africa needs to industrialize. And industrialization is best achieved when you take the materials that are pre existing in an environment, in a country, in a
Mm.
continent, add value to them, because people have access to the stuff that is in their ground, or they should be, or they should have the kind of access. So why not use that which is already available, beneficiate, add value to it, and then you do what the so-called first world does: sell it to them, brand it,
Mm.
package it, make it beautiful and sell it to them, and then you get the benefit of the higher value that comes out of that. And that is what creates wealth,
Mm.
actually,
Mm.
industrialization.
Yes.
And so we are then we do curate our entrepreneurs in light of the African problem, to
Mm.
say we want people that are beneficiation, people that are adding value to things that are already existing in Africa. And
Mm.
if it's not like a raw material, but at least something that is inspired, for example, by African culture, because some of these are artists, they are people that are painters, they are sculptures, they are in various industries, fashion
Yeah.
designers, but they are promoting that which is coming out of Africa, and
Okay.
the quality of it is excellent.
Vuyelwa, I remember in one of our conversations, you were telling me that you like to be around people who, in entrepreneurship, people who have done better than you, people who um, have been in the entrepreneurship journey, so that you can learn something off of them. And that made me wonder, what is the importance of having a mentor as an entrepreneur, and how does one choose a mentor?
A very nice question as well.
Mm,
Sure. I think that it's probably one of the least talked about, but most one of the more important, I don't know, supporters of entrepreneurship, so to
mm,
speak, because as I said to you earlier, entrepreneurship can be very hard. Like I don't know, as I am, it, and so it's just the mental wellness of having someone, that understands your business, that is there to give you the guidance. It's priceless, I think,
yes,
for me. Especially in in a couple of scenarios. For example, when you have to make a very difficult decision, whether it's about scaling up,
yes,
hiring, considering partnerships, mentors are critical, because of course they come with experience.
yes,
They understand the world of entrepreneurship, and they've made those decisions prior to you. That's why they are your mentors. Mentors are very critical, especially in instances where an entrepreneur has to make a big decision. And it's scary
mm,
because those decisions are sometimes scary. You don't know whether it's going to work or not, and the reason it's big, it's because it's going to impact your business for good or for worse. And so, to
mm,
have the guidance of someone with experience, and someone that has made mistakes or successes prior to you, is priceless. It's
mm,
something that one would recommend to each and every entrepreneur. And I think for me, I have benefited greatly from having not just one, but several mentors throughout my journey. And
mm.
I don't know, I sit here and I'm like, actually, I don't know what I would have done without some of my mentors. So I think for me, I would say it's absolutely priceless.
It's
And now, to
priceless.
answer your second question, how do you, choose an
Choose
entrepreneur?
a mentor.
I don't
Yeah.
know if there is a scientific way, but I think for me, what worked is someone who has experience in the work that you are doing. And obviously, the closer, the industry is to the industry that your mentor is to, the one that you are in, the better, because that person literally can hold your hand and walk you through the journey, because it's a path that they've traveled. But it
Yes.
doesn't have to be, absolutely matched in terms of industry, because any business experience, there's a lot of business experience that can cut across industries. So I would say, for me, the closer you can have a mentor who comes from an industry, the better. But don't by any means think that it must be, match perfect before it works. So that would be one aspect. And I think the other thing, second thing I would say, is that your mentor needs to understand your business, which is linked to the first point, but also understand and have a passion for you and your business, your personal success in the business, and also
Mm,
and be passionate about what you are doing. And I think I've had the very good fortune of people that have mentored me love what I do. They see the value in it, and they are excited about it. So the mentorship then is big. It's a mutual inspiration, because they really love, the fact that there is someone who's impacting a particular space that they believe in. So it's very important for your mentor to believe in you and to believe in what you're doing,
yes.
and so forth. So
Mm,
I think for me, to shorten things, those are the two, for me, biggest qualities that I would want or
mm,
recommend, in mentor. There are many, but I think those would be the top
mm.
two for me.
Hmm. Okay. Going back also from one of conversations we've had before, something that was an eye opener for me was when we talked about, you said something about we generally were referring to South Africa, where we are, that we generally lack that cultural entrepreneurial spirit. There isn't much of the structures and systems that are supportive of entrepreneurship. As a result, entrepreneurship is not an easy journey, for someone to undertake, because of the setup is not so conducive from a young age. When we go to school, we are taught so that we can be employed at the end of our schooling journey. Um, what do you think can be done to change this, the status quo? And is it the same? Is it similar with all the other African countries you have traveled? Do you see the same pattern?
Hmm. Sure. Your questions are very poignant. I think for me, they vary. I think there is a general. I don't even think it's an African problem. I think it's a general problem in terms of education itself. I think that's where it
Right,
starts for me. The way that
right.
the world educates its people. I think the people that have really dominated socio-economic politics, etc., is the Western world, the Europes and the Americas. So a lot of us copy and paste models from the West into our local systems and cultures. And I think so. Western education for me is built upon a capitalist model, which says that
Mm,
most of the people work for the few. It's basically a step one or two up from feudalism, where it's just a few people sitting at the top and they are lording it over the rest of the people in the world. So the education model teaches the average person, as you said,
mm,
to become an employee. It's like our parents send us to school because they want us to get jobs. So and by default, it means that we are wired a particular way, which sort of like it's not really conducive for the spirit of entrepreneurship. And as I said, this is a global issue. And I think Africa is particularly impacted by
yeah.
this, having come from colonialism, where a lot of, in fact, if not all the countries of Africa have now achieved independence, but the systems and the processes that are in place, are still economic models or socio ideological models that come from the West. So nothing much has changed. There has been no innovation in terms of thinking and how we change and maybe craft our own way. So I think, as I said, there is it's not just an African problem. It's a global problem, but it does impact maybe
It's a
Africa
problem.
disproportionately because of our low base for economic growth and the likes. Typically the Western countries, it's everybody acknowledges that they typically richer, they have more prosperity and wealth,
Mm,
and so a lot more people there are middle class. In fact, the middle class is standard over there. There's very very few people that are very poor, and there's very very people that are sitting very very rich. The majority of the people are actually middle class, whereas in Africa, in most instances, most people are poor. And so
mm,
yeah, it doesn't really help. But again, what I think you are seeing in you were asking what's the solution. I think in some countries, like I think Nigeria, like where
mhm.
there is no social services for poor people. If you're poor and you do not have money, you hustle. So there's no network for you, there's no grant for so people in countries like that, where there is no you know there's no option B in terms of income generation, they tend to
Yes.
be more entrepreneurial. And so you will find that the people are selling food, they're selling, they are trade, what is called trade industries. They are they are trading amongst each other, in
Hmm.
order to get wealth. So there generally is a bigger or a greater sense of entrepreneurship in countries like that, because you have to hustle to live. You
Yeah.
don't hustle, you don't live. It's that simple.
Yeah.
Whereas in countries of particularly Southern Africa, where governments have some sort of, I don't know, social grants, like in this country, people generally just wait for the government to supply them, and so there is a bit of an entitlement mentality. And also they know that the government will not let them die, and so
Yeah.
why should I work? And this is what you see, that in, for example, typically in South Africa, where foreigners come in,
Yeah.
African foreigners, I mean, they
Yes.
come into the country because they don't qualify for social grants. They then work, they start
Mm.
businesses, they hustle. And so it's different. That's why I'm saying it varies from country to country. But I think South Africa, statistically, if you look at the global or Pan-African rankings of entrepreneurship, South Africa doesn't fare badly. I
Okay.
think we are sort of maybe somewhere in the middle. We are not the worst, but we are by far not the best. And I think that, any sort of, if we are going to impact the area, there is a lot of entrepreneurship support in South Africa, both from the private sector and government. I do want to acknowledge that there is a lot that the government, is doing from a policy perspective, but also from an implementation perspective. You have organizations like your CEDAs, your CEPAs, your IDCs, plenty of them, funds for this and that and the other, in order to develop entrepreneurship. So there is, I
Yeah.
think, what I would call political will. So
Yeah.
from the government or the public sector. And I also think there is the same sort of thing that you're going to be finding in South Africa specifically, where private sector companies have ESD, or so-called enterprise development, or supply development programs to assist entrepreneurs to build their businesses. But we are still
But
finding that all the effort, all the goodwill from both the private and the private sector is by no means, by no significant means translating into the kind of, entrepreneurship growth that, if you are investing so much money and time and institutions in it, you should be getting. Entrepreneurs cry daily that the systems that are in place actually work to inhibit rather than grow them. And this is real. I mean, I was sitting at the Nation Brand Forum for that was hosted by Brand South Africa last month, and I was listening to some of the best or the most successful entrepreneurs that have recently come out of South Africa. People, for example, who that own brands like Batu, Drip, Tepo Jeans, the Legends Baba,
yes.
franchise. And these guys have said, we have succeeded despite the government initiatives, not because of them. Most of them will tell you a story of woe and frustration when it comes to accessing monies and also resources
Yes.
from the government and so forth. So I'm not going to say that government is not trying to do anything, but there is obviously a huge gap between the effort that they put in and how the reception on the other side. These guys are saying, we did it all on our own. And I can attest to that. I am a product of, you know,
Yes.
having to do it on your own.
On your own.
You do know that there is government assistance out there, but it's
Yeah.
so cumbersome. There is so much red tape. And the people that are meant to assist you have never been entrepreneurs. This is one of our biggest insights, is that you must never have a situation that people are sitting in offices who have never ever been entrepreneurs. They have no clue what it takes to actually build a business from the bottom up, especially if you are blank and you are, and you come from a poor background. These people are salaried. All they have ever known is money coming into their bank account, whether they work or for it or not. Yes, they are working in their offices. That's what they are hired to do.
Yes.
But for us on the other side, it's another world. And it's a world that they have no clue about. And that's a fact. And part of the big problem, until we have what someone in one of these sessions at the Nation Branding Forum of Brand South Africa hosted, was that you need hybrids, working in these institutions, people who have experienced entrepreneurship. They know what it's like, they know what it takes. And people who have institutional who know how to, the mechanism from an institutional side to support entrepreneurs. So he was talking about, and we thought about it, in that meeting, to say, actually, you do need hybrids, because obviously there must be some level of compliance, and there must be some level of accountability, for government programs to be able. They can't just be dispersing resources and money willy-nilly. But right now, it is too cumbersome. And the biggest gap for me is that the people who work there have no clue who we are. They don't know us. And therefore, they can never help us. And
Yeah.
as a marketer, and with coming from the background, if you don't know your customer, if you don't know what they are thinking about when they are going to sleep, what they are thinking about when they are waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, what they are thinking about when they are having breakfast, if you don't know what is keeping your customer awake at night, you should not be servicing that person.
Yes.
You're not going to do them any favors. And that for me is, I'm not saying it's the only thing that can be done, but I think it's a fundamental situation that is actually inhibiting, growth. On the private sector side, these are big multinational companies, people who also are salaried. If you really think about it, they earn a lot of money,
Yes.
and they are, I don't know, they obviously, it's not really fair for me to generalize, but by and large, the impression that you get is that the private sector is doing entrepreneurship development because of BEE laws. They just want to comply.
Yes.
And so whether and this is the impression that we entrepreneurs, this is what we discuss in our, our sessions and in our meetings, is that it's all about compliance. And because, for example, when we try to get some of us into these big multinationals as suppliers, they make it an absolute nightmare for us to even qualify. So on the one hand, you have the government strictly restricting our movement through like bureaucracy.
Yeah.
That is just like, yeah. On the other side, it's a similar kind of bureaucracy. We must comply to stringent measures of, getting our products into big retailers, where we are small and medium enterprises based. Most of us have self-funded our own businesses, and half of us have no kind of like social capital, never mind economic capital, to be able to afford some of the things that they require. And these companies know that very, very well. And yet they do nothing or very little to actually bring us on board, because that is the reality. And if you were genuinely interested in growing the economy, in growing entrepreneurship, change the rules.
Change the rules.
Nobody wants to change the rules. The government doesn't want to change the rules. The private sector doesn't want to change the rules. And people are stuck in between. So only those who are, by God's mercy and grace, make it through the system. But believe you me, helps. You see, yeah, it's nice. There is goodwill, where there is genuine goodwill, but it's not working. The system is broken.
Something has to change.
And I'm saying they must change the rules so that they are
Change the
bending
rules.
to closer towards what the needs of the actual entrepreneurs are, versus us complying with the things that they think we must comply with. They must come to us,
I see. I see.
at least meet us halfway.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Vuyelwa, let's move to the next one about some people who have an interest in starting a business. They dread drawing up business plans. Some others start without one. Besides the thing of I have to have a business plan in order to show it to the bank so they can give me a loan. People really generally don't like to draw up business plans because it's some work, it's a headache, it's a pain. Are they really necessary, these business plans, and should we really have them before starting a business?
Sure, that's a tough one. I think that you are right to say that they are cumbersome. I mean, remember that the objective of an entrepreneur is to build a business and make money. You know, And that's why most of us start businesses. We want to be self sufficient.
Right.
And so the focus, and when you are brand new in entrepreneurship, your focus will be get the clients and service them. So most of our time is spent on actually doing that. And so business planning, I wouldn't say it's an absolute necessity for you to before you can begin. But I think
Okay.
if you have the kind of business model where you're trying to attract financing in order for you to start, I think it's going to be very difficult for you to do that without a business plan, because once again, it's one of those compliance bureaucratic things that,
Yes.
entrepreneurs are required to fulfill. So
Yeah.
if that's what you want to do, then you need one, and you will not move without one. But even if you do have one, most of us would tell you that it still doesn't guarantee that you are going to get um, the the work,
Yeah.
that the money that you need. Sorry.
Oh,
And
of
so
course.
it's a nice, yeah, so it's not a guarantee by any means. And I think most of us come, I think it's important for you to start your business, because from my personal experience, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs will sort of like agree with me, that you start a business with an idea of what you think it should be, but then and you try obviously to craft a sense of what your services are and what is it that you want to focus on. And but then there is something that is called the market, the actual people that you are selling to, whether it's goods or services, who impact, who will respond to what you are offering in ways that will inevitably change, the dynamic of what you are offering. So the feedback that you get from your consumers, for example, about a product that you're selling, you've got to adopt, you've got to evolve it so that it suits them better and better. So I have learned that. I mean, I started my business as a consultant, and I thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to just brand countries. This is going to be nice. I'm just going to do brands. Like I'm going to help companies, with brand strategies, whatever my background was. And then
Yes.
when I actually did like the actual work, I realized that, there is a dynamic here, and the market sometimes leads you. It's not like you just make it and will buy it. There is the response from the market that forces you to kind of like change your business. So that being said, I do think that you need to have some measure of experience in the actual market before you invest all the time and effort in developing something that actually takes a lot of time, energy from the business, and resources actually from the business. So I would
Yes.
say it does depend. If you want funding, you will not get funding without a business plan. Forget it.
Yes.
And but if you want to grow your business organically, I wouldn't insist on a business plan. I think a business plan should be an outcome of you being in the market, understanding what the market demand, dynamics are, what your skill sets are, and then you craft something that's going to work for you in relation to the realities of the environment that you are actually working in.
Mm. Mm. Okay. In closing, Vuyelwa, do you have any favorite book that you read that helped you in your entrepreneurship journey?
Yes, I actually have two books.
Okay.
The first one is the Bible.
The
And I
Bible.
know this is not typically something that an entrepreneur will tell you, but
Yeah.
I think for me, the issue of faith and having, God as your support,
Hmm.
it has, I don't know, I can never overemphasize it, because
Hmm.
it's just for your mental health, because entrepreneurship is hard. I think so you do need a spiritual base, a spiritual foundation, from which you can draw sustenance, because working every day takes so much from you. You are giving to your customers, you're giving to your employees, you are giving, to the world and the economy, and you need something to sustain you that is beyond the cents and the rands, the beyond the, the material world. And I have found solace, and I've found inspiration. I've found, encouragement from reading the Bible as a believer. For me, I think I would put that book above all other books that I have read, because I would just there's just so much inspiration, found in there. So I would say that would be my number one read. It is a bestseller globally for generations. So I do
Yes.
think
Yes.
that I'm not the only person who will say that. I think the second book that I read
Yeah.
that someone gave me is a book by Phil Knight, the founder of Nike,
Uh-huh.
the brand. And
Uh-huh.
I read that book when I think the person that gave it to me to read is an entrepreneur. And I think we were just, a friend of mine, we were
Yeah.
just, swapping stories of how difficult sometimes this journey can be.
Yes.
And he gave me that book to read, and I read that book. I was like, my goodness, this guy went through hell. You see the success of Nike today. I mean, I've
Mm-hmm.
even been part of the people that have criticized, the sweat factory, and I'm not saying they did everything right, but
Yeah.
the sweating that he went through, the struggle emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
psychologically, financially, and you just and the loss, the constant hustling, going back and forth, losing, trying again, trying a different model, having to go back to work, and I don't know, the sacrifice of it. That book inspired me. I read it, and it said to me, what, Vuyelwa, you think that you have suffered, but my struggles have not even come close, technically, to the types of things that he went through. And yet he has built this amazing business that we all admire. And so that, I think, would be my other read that has greatly impacted me or encouraged me
Yes.
in my journey.
Vuyelwa, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. It has really been eye-opening. It has been really insightful. I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show and want to support us, please tell a friend to tell a friend about Mej. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our handle is @MejPodcast. My Entrepreneurship Journey on LinkedIn. Remember, we are available to listen to for free on whichever platform you listen to your podcast on, be it Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and so forth. I'm Vuyelwa, and you've been listening to My Entrepreneurship Journey.